to Our Curious Amalgam, the weekly podcast brought to you by the Antitrust Law section of the American Bar Association. Our Curious Amalgam explores the fascinating and increasingly overlapping world of competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law. Each week, we bring you leading global experts on the most compelling issues of the day. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Our Curious Amalgam. I'm Alicia Downey. The title of today's episode is A New Syllabus for Antitrust Class. Meet the authors of the first open-source U.S. antitrust law casebook. Many U.S. antitrust lawyers trace the beginning of their careers all the way back to law school when they took an antitrust class as an elective in their second or third year. Legal textbooks have always been expensive, but these days the cost of traditional hardcover or even the newfangled electronic casebooks can range from $300 to $500. With the support of the ABA Antitrust Law section, our guests recently completed the world's first open-source antitrust law casebook for use in law schools. Today, we'll talk to them about whether eliminating the expense of traditional casebooks might lead to an increase in law students taking antitrust and potentially pursuing careers in the field. My co-host today is Sarah Zhang. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Alicia.
Would you like to introduce our guests?
Yes, I would love to. So today our guests are Daniel Francis and Christopher Sprigman, and they are the co-authors of this new open source antitrust casebook. Daniel is an assistant professor of law at NYU. He writes and teaches about regulation and competition, including antitrust, constitutional, and other rules that affect competition. And he has a particular interest in dynamic and high-tech markets. He has previously served as deputy director of the FTC's Bureau of Competition, as well as associate director for digital markets and senior counsel. Chris is a professor of law at NYU as well, and he teaches intellectual property law, antitrust law, torts, and comparative constitutional law. His research focuses on how legal rules affect innovation and the deployment of new technologies. He has previously served as an appellate counsel in the Antitrust Division of the U.S. Department of Justice, where U.S. versus Microsoft was one of his cases. Welcome to Our Curious Amalgam, and we're very happy to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having us.
So when and how did this project begin, and who have worked on this casebook?
So we began this about 2 years ago. John Glecklin from the Antitrust section gave us a call and basically said, hey, I've been looking at your copyright casebook. So I had co-authored with Jeannie Fromer, also at NYU, an openly licensed copyright casebook. And that casebook has become pretty widely used and well-known. And we're now, I think we're headed into our 5th edition. But John called up and he said, would it be possible to do something like that for antitrust? And Daniel and I started chatting about it, thinking it through. And yeah, we thought it would be possible. And in fact, when we looked at the market, we noticed that there wasn't a book like that available yet. And so we decided we'd give it a try.
And for those who don't know, John Glecklin is one of the former chairs of the Antitrust Law section. So I guess when he calls, you pick up the phone, right?
Well, he's my former law school classmate at the University of Chicago. So when he calls, that's why I pick up the phone.
This was kind of a signature effort for John. So for a long time, as you guys know, we've had a increasingly urgent conversation in antitrust about how to diversify the field, about how to make antitrust a more inclusive space. And one of the places where there might be a barrier to entry to the antitrust profession is the antitrust classroom itself. And so John, who at that time was just getting started on his year as section chair, had the idea, goodness me, wouldn't it be a great thing if the section were able to inspire or facilitate the creation of some resource that made it just a little easier to get into the antitrust classroom in the first place. And so just as Chris said, he started making some phone calls and he put the two of us together, and 2 years later, here we are.
Now, the two of you led this project. Did you have other team members involved, and what did they do?
So Chris and I were co-authors of the book, but we have been immensely lucky to have had a lot of help and support in a lot of different ways. So one of those ways is a whole bunch of people from across the antitrust universe have very graciously, donated their time, as everyone involved in this project is donating their time, to reading and commenting on or sharing suggestions or feedback on all the different chapters of the book. And some people were kind and generous enough to go through the whole 780-page work and give pretty detailed reactions. And as you can imagine, that's been incredibly helpful to the final product. The other thing that's been incredibly helpful to producing a product and a launch version that makes us so excited is that we've had the support of teachers, the University of Washington and the University of Florida, and at George Mason, who've used the draft casebook in different ways throughout their own antitrust classes. And in fact, it was the primary text at the University of Washington and at the University of Florida this last academic year. And so in conjunction with our own beta testing here at NYU, it means that, the casebook has had the opportunity to benefit from the input of teachers and students from across the country now over a period of, getting on for 2 years. And that's been just a terrific contribution to the success of the project.
Well, that's great. By the time this episode airs, the book will have been made available. I know the launch date is imminent as we're recording this. And there will be a dedicated website. Tell us the name of the website, how to find it, and also what the format of the book is like. Is it really just a static paginated PDF of a book? Chris Sprigman, do you want to start?
Yeah, the website is antitrustcasebook.org. And if you go there, you'll find the book itself, both the entire book and each chapter, if people want to download chapter by chapter. You'll also find a link to an Amazon page where you can have the book printed on demand. And the price for that is a little bit more than $16. So you get a very nicely printed book delivered to your house in a few days from Amazon. For a very low price. If you prefer a paper copy, you don't want to print it out, but have it printed for you. On the website, there's also a whole slew of teaching materials. So for teachers, there are sample syllabi, there are slides that they can use, there are sample questions, exercise questions that they can use in class. So there's a whole suite of materials that help them teach from the book and teach effectively from the get-go. Also, there's something that we think is helpful, which is there's a community. So we have a listserv. When they sign up for the book, they can sign up for the listserv. And the listserv gives them the ability to ask questions to all the people who are teaching from the book who sign up for the listserv. You can think of it as kind of like a living teacher's manual. There's a teacher's memo that we produced, but in the moment you might have a question that you want to put to a bunch of people who are teaching from the same book, and this platform gives you the ability to do that. The book, what does it look like? It's a high quality print on demand book with a nice cover that is engaging, and the book is clear and looks good. It looks like a commercially printed book. It is online. If you download it, it is a PDF. It is not a fancy hypertext linked document with a bunch of internal stuff, partially because those files get really big. This is already a really big file. And so to facilitate people being able actually to use this on a variety of computers, not all of which are super heavy duty, we've kept things simple. That has really worked for the copyright book, and we're hoping it'll work for this book too.
I mean, at every stage of the process, right, our watchword has been accessibility, and a part of that is technical simplicity. So we have a PDF for the whole book. You can buy it with one click if you want a hard copy on Amazon. You can just grab an individual chapter if you want from the website. And just as Chris says, one of the things that we're excited about doing is making available to students and teachers a whole bunch of complementary materials so that if folks have been using another book for some years and they want to try switching, but, that might involve, if it was in a vacuum, generating a whole bunch of new teaching materials. We wanted to do everything we could to kind of do that work for folks and then create resources that would make it pretty easy to give the book a try.
So, quick poll. Who among us took antitrust in law school? I did not. Sarah, you're the closest to law school. Did you take it?
I did.
Okay. Do you remember how much your textbook cost?
I don't remember exactly, but I try to buy used books. And so for me, I never really considered buying new books, and I would just pick between renting or buying used. And I usually end up buying used because I just felt like the rental money wasn't worth it when you have to give it back. But nowadays, I kind of regret it because my bookshelf, I'm stuck with all these law books that I don't really know what to do with, but they are pretty decorational. So,
And how about you, Daniel and Chris? Were you law students who took antitrust? Did you use a giant textbook that you had to pay a lot of money for?
Yeah, I didn't take antitrust in law school. I took antitrust, basically on the job after I got out of law school. One thing, Sarah mentions used textbooks. One problem with used textbooks is that when editions change, as they do, there's no used market available. So the used market is kind of iffy.
And Daniel, were you an antitrust law student at any point?
I was not. So just like Chris, I also came to antitrust after I had finished my legal education. So I learned it on the job from when I was pulling books off the shelf or treatises, whether it was ALD or the big Arita set or one of the case books and teaching aids used in school. There's something to love about every one of those resources. And, it's been a wonderful experience with Chris to think kind of freshly from the ground up about what would be an accessible and new and inviting way to tell the antitrust story to folks who are hearing it for the first time.
So I just want to ask one more quick question about your process, which is, did you start by collecting all the antitrust casebooks you could find and trying to sort of identify what the good and the bad were and put it all together? Did you start with a clean piece of paper? How did that work?
Yeah, so we started by looking at the existing books, really their tables of contents, and seeing where there was overlap and where there was divergence. So just so we had some sense of, what were the ways in which the field was presented to people, and we had some sense of how we thought it should happen versus how it was happening in the existing books. So the way our book is presented is a little different from any existing book, although I think it's all the books are more similar than they are different in terms of their outline, their basic outline of how material is presented. And then what we started doing is just mapping out within each chapter what we thought the principal cases were that we would have to discuss. Then the next step is gathering all those principal cases and beginning to edit them in a way that students would find accessible. So the editing process took a while. We would edit cases, we'd look at each other's edits. And then, of course, once we had the edits under control, we started writing interstitial material. So material that introduces each chapter, maps it out, material that introduces the cases, that discusses, the concepts that the cases are addressing, all the substance of a casebook. I think it's true to say, I think, Daniel, that our casebook is a little bit more explanatory. There's more interstitial material than your typical casebook. I think we write pretty economically, but we're trying to explain to people what the cases are about, not just present the cases. And that, I think, sets our book apart a little bit.
I totally agree with all of that. Everything comes back to this project being a tool to invite people into antitrust, right? So number one thing that we wanted to do was come out with a tour or a kind of guided or curated tour of the antitrust universe in a way that was framed kind of from the get-go as a conversation that was welcoming people in. We wanted this not to be a 1,200 or 1,500 page tome. We wanted it to be a single volume. We wanted it to talk in an accessible voice while, providing plenty of invitation to folks to explore the complexities and contradictions that permeate antitrust. And we wanted to be sort of scrupulously fair and even-handed at this moment in antitrust when the deep normative controversies and the big picture discussions about what antitrust can and should do or become, when those questions are so urgent and when students and teachers might be approaching them from so many different perspectives, we really wanted to take the opportunity that was furnished by writing a book in this moment of offering a text that tried to identify those questions, lay out some of the stakes and relationships between them, and acknowledge the vast range for reasonable disagreement within which the antitrust discussion happens. And, I think and hope the book has done a pretty good job of inviting conversation and participation across the spectrum.
Yeah, I want to underline how important that is for our mission. So this book will be the first contact that most students have with antitrust in any real sense. And it's important, given the range of views within the field, that you present those views fairly, charitably, and that you give people a sense of really the foment in the field right now, the ways in which people are engaging more broadly with antitrust, not just as a legal discipline, but in a sense as a political and social discipline as well. This is what we try to do in the book without grinding any particular axe. And, that is, if you do that well, that is a real service to the students. That is the goal.
So do you plan to keep the book and all the other materials up to date?
Absolutely. So that's one of the great advantages of this form, right? It's very nimble and it's very easy to keep it up to date. So, one of the other things that's been motivating us and making us feel so excited about the opportunity to create a new book at this moment is our book really tries to give a sense of antitrust and its debates as they are right now. And what that means is, or has meant to us as we've been assembling the book and sort of agonizing over what to include and what to leave out and what to highlight, is that we made a conscious decision to put the spotlight much more sharply on new, modern, current, contemporaneous events and controversies, and let go a little bit some of the older cases from the far end of the 20th century that take up a lot of space in many other sort of perspectives on the casebook form. And so that energy, that mission of giving a faithful and reasonably comprehensive picture of antitrust as it is today is always going to characterize this project. So every spring, I think it's probably going to be every May, but we'll see how it goes. Every May, we're going to release a new and updated version of the book. So, folks who used our book last year will be able to, just download a revised version that accommodates any important changes in the law or new developments since then. And that'll happen seamlessly, right? We don't have to wait to go through some process with a publisher. Chris and I will be working on that throughout the year, and it'll go live along with the accompanying teaching materials at the same time every year. And Chris, that's an approach that we've obviously borrowed from this book's older brother, the copyright book that Chris and Jeannie have so successfully produced.
Yeah, and I have to say that the ability to update yearly or whenever is appropriate is an enormous benefit to this type of openly licensed casebook. So there are obvious benefits to open licensing, so free download or print on demand at cost at Amazon. So that's a benefit. But there are other benefits too. So one of them is, rather than be on a publisher schedule where publishers make a business decision about when to update, and while they're between updates, they're issuing supplements that they charge money for that are kind of awkward, that require students to kind of refer back and forth. This is a format where you can give the student a well put together single volume book every year. It'll be current. There'll be no kind of business considerations about updating. It'll simply be on a predictable cycle. I think this helps a lot. It helps the students who are already, dealing with a complex set of issues to just kind of keep their eyes in one place. That's been true of the copyright book, and it'll be true of this book as well.
Something else that's a real benefit, we think at least, of this digital format is that it makes it really easy for us to kind of build out the modular scope of what we're doing. So right now, the book has 12 chapters. And within those 12 chapters, there's pretty significant room for choice about where a class might want to focus. You could very easily teach 3 sessions on antitrust and IP based on the materials that we've provided, or you could switch the focus more and lean further into private enforcement or onto some of antitrust's frontiers in immunities and exemptions. But in future editions of the book, we're going to expand that concept. So what you'll start to see over the next couple of years is additional optional chapters being added onto the core 12 in the book. So a chapter on the Robinson-Patman Act, a chapter on healthcare antitrust, a chapter on digital antitrust, those are the sorts of things that we'll be starting to add over the next couple of years. So teachers and classes who have particular interests and want to kind of delve into a little bit of a more specialized area of antitrust can do that within the sphere of our book.
So you mentioned copyright. Are there other areas of law where similar open source books have been created? And do you expect that to become a trend?
Yeah, so this is a growth industry, and a lot of the growth is happening at NYU. Barton Beebe, our colleague here at NYU, it must be almost 7 or 8 years ago, I think, published an open source trademark casebook, which has become the leading trademark casebook in the field. It's brilliant. I've taught trademark from it several times. I love the book. Jeannie and I have the copyright book. Last time I taught torts, I used an openly licensed torts book by John Fabian Witt and Karen Tawney that I liked very much. And there are more and more openly licensed books coming into the market. Look, I think what's going on here is a mix of things. But one very big thing that stands out is that the cost of books is just very high. And academics are starting to worry more about accessibility to their courses. And so, that's driving part of this. Part of what's driving this also is, I think, academics are realizing that commercial presses, there's a very small number of books that have wide enough distribution that the authors make significant money. Most of these books, the authors don't make significant money. And, so they're not a reliable source of income. And so, if you publish a book openly licensed, open source, there are a lot of benefits for the students. There are also benefits for you. It's a good chance that the book is going to get, if it's a good book, and if you get to the market with the first openly licensed book, pretty good chance you're going to get some uptake. Which is of course helpful. It exposes students to the way you think, which is nice. Those benefits, I think, are beginning to be realized more and more, and the market is responding.
So I guess I have to mention, unlike a professor who is publishing with a commercial publisher who does, in fact, no doubt earns some kind of royalty and has the ability to assign his or her own book to a class. What's in it for you?
So just to follow directly onto what Chris was saying, right? I think part of the fun, maybe the most fun, the dimension of the job of being a teacher that feels most like a privilege and a joy is feeling like you're helping people do something they're excited about doing. And most of the time that involves, being in a classroom or welcoming students to office hours. And it's this, the magic of being in the room with the people that you're helping is wonderful. But a project like this has given us the opportunity, as Chris has already done with the copyright book, to, in a pretty concrete and direct way, help students anywhere, right? Not just across the United States, but around the world. If they want to learn more or find out more about US antitrust, this book is a free gift to anybody who might find it useful or even entertaining or amusing to marinate themselves in the richness and complexity of antitrust. So recognizing that I think anybody who chooses to become a teacher is in part drawn by the raw magnetism of the feeling of, gosh, I did something useful for someone today. This book is a way of doing that for people who might not be right in the room with us here at NYU, but who nevertheless we might be able to do something useful for.
So in the future, will there be a way to measure whether the free casebook has caused more students to take antitrust?
Great question. So that's more a question for the AALS, I suppose. What do they call it? The ALS, the Association of American Law Schools? Sorry, they would probably have some sense of the antitrust enrollment over time. And, whether our book causes antitrust enrollment to increase is going to be a very difficult thing to isolate. I will say, though, that, look, so the copyright book that I wrote with Jeannie, that's in use in over 70 law schools. We can see both on the website and through Amazon's dashboards that people are downloading the book, and, they're downloading the book, they're downloading separate chapters. The book is in use. The book gets cited as a resource in other scholarship. And, there's other stuff that happens. So just recently, a class of copyright students at BYU sent us a video of them singing a song that they wrote to thank us for giving them the casebook. So, is this causing more people to take copyright? I don't know. Will our book cause more people to take antitrust? I don't know. But I think it's a fair bet that Econ 101 would suggest anyway, that if you lower the cost of entry, on the margin, you're going to get some uptake. And we're hoping for that.
And I'll add that it's been wonderful to hear, not just from our classes here at NYU, but also from Florida and Washington and George Mason. Students seem really excited by the existence and creation of a zero-cost casebook, and I think they've been excited about playing a role. And so I think we've seen already in this pilot stage, both Chris and I at NYU and our friend and collaborator Doug Ross at the University of Washington and others have already kind of tangibly seen that this seems to be really welcome in the classroom. So that gives us a little charge of enthusiasm and energy as we take it across the line and share it with the world.
I hope you'll be happy to know you've just made another sale. I'm just a lowly adjunct at New England Law Boston, but for my fall class, I'm going to use this textbook. I'm going to use your teaching materials, and I will be having to revise my syllabus accordingly, all those page numbers, but we'll get through it. So actually, and I'm very, very excited about it. I think it will make a big difference, particularly for the population at that law school. I think it will in fact, potentially lower a barrier to entry for some of those students, and I'm excited to use it. Now, before we go, we're just about at the end of our program. We're going to ask you the question that we ask all of our guests, which is to tell us something interesting about yourselves that is outside of your professional life. Why don't I start with Chris?
Something interesting about myself. Well, it's been a while since I've been interesting, but I guess when I was 21, I sailed a boat with 3 friends from Singapore up to Borneo and then down to Bali. So it took us 34 days, I think, altogether. And I love to sail, and I love the open ocean and everything that's out there. So whenever I can, I try to do that.
That's great. And you were not eaten by sharks then? Very good.
No, we saw a lot of sharks, but I wasn't eaten by any of them.
Okay. Daniel, something interesting about yourself?
Good heavens. All right, why don't I go with this? I love music making of all kinds. When I was in law school in England, I spent those years mainly conducting orchestras and choirs. And these days I'm in an Antitrust cover band with some other members of the Antitrust family like Bruce Hoffman and Tara Kozlov. And our last gig together was playing the spring meeting last year. So
remind us of the name of the band.
The name of our band is Side Hustle, and we've been on hiatus for a few months because our lead guitarist has been captaining a U.S. Navy cruiser on the other side of the world, but he just got back to port, so we're looking forward to literally putting the band back together.
Oh, that's great. And now, to wrap it up, we're going to invite you to play our game, our end-of-show game, that we call the Curious Hat.
And now it's time for the Curious Hat!
The rules could not be more simple. We have selected a question at random that we're going to have each of you answer. I will turn it over to Sarah to ask the question.
So the question is, do you like to cook or bake? And if so, what's your special dish?
Oh boy, I guess I'll start. I love to cook. I love to bake. It's one of the things my wife and I enjoy to do together. During the pandemic, we were baking an ungodly amount of bread.
What's your specialty?
I'm more like, as an Italian American, I'm more the Italian food guy. My wife is more the French food person, but she's just a much more wide-ranging cook. She can cook really good Indian food. She can cook really good Thai food. So it's, take your pick. She can usually do it. My palate is significantly more constrained.
Oh, all right. You're too modest to tell us. All right, Daniel, brag away. What do you cook best?
Oh goodness, I wish I had something that was worthy of following that. I'm a terrible cook. I hate cooking. If it were possible to live forever on photosynthesis and an IV drip, I would do it in a heartbeat. And so, yeah, the genre of food and I overlap only at points of need. So I cook at home, for the half of the evenings in the week. And, you're taking your life into your hands if you eat a meal that I've prepared. And so I strive to be better than I am. But I wish I could say I had something that I prepared notably better than anything else. I'm just a catastrophe in every direction when it comes to the preparation of food.
All right. Well, as an English person, you can boil water and make a cup of tea, can't you?
Yes, absolutely. And as an English person, I know how to boil a vegetable to within an inch of its life.
Excellent.
But that's about as far as I can go.
So Daniel, if we co-host a party, I'll take care of the cooking. You handle the music.
I think that's a plan. Thank you both for being terrific guests, and we hope to hear more about the book, and we hope it's a fantastic success.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Our Curious Amalgam, a competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law podcast. It is produced and shared around the globe by ABA's Antitrust Law Section. The opinions expressed by the participants in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent their employer or other organizations. If you like what you heard or would like to become a member of the American Bar Association, please check out what the Antitrust section has to offer at ambar.org/antitrust. You can learn more about our podcast at ourcuriousamalgam.com. If you have comments, suggestions, or podcast ideas, please reach out to us at podcast@ourcuriousamalgam.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.